There is a rule that governs the afterlife, and almost nobody knows it, because almost nobody has ever needed to. The rule is simple. When you die, you go somewhere, up or down. The paperwork sorts itself out. The machinery of the universe files you where you belong, and that is that. Billions of souls, processed without incident since the beginning of everything. The machinery has one exception. It has exactly one soul it cannot file, cannot process, cannot keep, and, most importantly, cannot destroy. And on the particular evening our story begins, that soul was in the middle of dying again. His name was Lobo, the last Czarnian, the main man, and he was currently 40,000 feet above a dead moon, with a plasma lance through his chest, laughing so hard he was coughing up pieces of his own lung. "Is that a T?" he bellowed at the bounty who'd skewered him, some six-armed warlord with a price on his head and, up until about 4 seconds ago, a great deal of confidence. "That's the big move? Fetal's giz, pal. I've had hangovers that hit harder than that." The warlord watched, with a slowly dawning horror, as Lobo reached down, wrapped one enormous fist around the plasma lance buried in his own sternum, and pulled it out, the way a man pulls a splinter, with mild annoyance and no particular urgency. The wound was already knitting shut, it always did. That was sort of the whole problem with Lobo, from the perspective of anyone who had ever tried to kill him. You couldn't. You could stab him. You could shoot him. You could throw him into a sun. People had, more than once, out of sheer frustration, and every time, from a single drop of blood, from one stray fleck of flesh floating in the void, the whole magnificent pastiche would grow back, bigger, angrier, and looking for the guy who'd inconvenienced him. So when the warlord's second shot took Lobo clean through the skull, a genuinely excellent shot, the kind that would have ended anyone else's story permanently, it didn't end Lobo's story, it just paused it, briefly. For the amount of time it takes a soul to travel from a body to wherever souls go. And that is where the trouble started, because the universe's machinery took one look at the incoming soul, checked its files, and did something it does for precisely one being in all of creation. It panicked. The gates of heaven are beautiful, golden, radiant, humming with the quiet certainty of a place that has never once had to raise its voice. Souls arrive here in a soft glow of acceptance, are gently welcomed, and pass through. Lobo arrived at the gates of heaven backwards, mid-sentence, still yelling at a warlord who was several dimensions away by now. "And another thing, you spineless sack of—" He stopped. He looked around. He took in the clouds, the light, the choir of celestial beings who had all gone very, very still. A slow grin spread across his face. "Oh, no way, no way. They actually let me in the front door this time." An angel, a senior one, judging by the number of wings and the depth of the dread on its face, stepped forward. It had done this before. It knew the drill. "Absolutely not," it said. "Aw, come on. You are barred," the angel recited, in the weary tone of someone reading a restraining order they have read many times. "By unanimous decree of the host, from entry into the Silver City, in perpetuity, on the grounds of—" It consulted a scroll that was mostly just the word "no," written 10,000 times. "Everything. On the grounds of everything you have ever done. I genocided my own planet as a school project," Lobo said, with the pride of a man showing off a trophy. "Got an A. We are aware. So you can't handle me. Fair. Send me downstairs then. Me and the other place go way back." He cracked his knuckles. It sounded like a car being crushed. They throw better parties anyway. The angel's expression, if anything, got worse. Because here was the thing that Lobo, in his infinite and cheerful self-regard, had never quite bothered to understand. It wasn't that heaven didn't want him. It was that hell didn't want him either. And when two eternal, opposed, all-powerful bureaucracies both refuse to accept the same soul, that soul doesn't go up, and it doesn't go down. It gets stuck, right in the seam between, right in the part of the machinery that isn't supposed to have anything in it at all. "Send him down," the angel said, and made a gesture of profound relief, the way you'd flick a spider off your arm. "Let them deal with him this cycle." And the floor of heaven opened up, and the main man fell, laughing the whole way, because Lobo always laughed on the way down. It was one of his best qualities, toward a hell that had absolutely no idea what was coming, and no way, once it arrived, to make it leave. Now, about that hell, because there is more than one as it turns out, and the machinery, flustered, overworked, dealing with the single most annoying soul in the history of creation, made a mistake. It reached for the hell it knew, the classic model, fire and brimstone and Lobo's usual haunts. And it missed. It sent him sideways, into a different hell, a newer one, a hell with a skyline like a fever dream, and a red sky that never changed, and a population of sinners who had never, not once, in the entire span of their damnation, encountered a being that the rules did not apply to. Lobo hit that hell at approximately the speed of an artillery shell. He came down in the middle of Pentagram City, the beating, neon-drenched heart of it, and he came down hard, straight through the roof of a building, through 6 floors, and into the pavement below, opening a crater in the street the size of a swimming pool. Car alarms shrieked. A cloud of red dust rolled outward. Somewhere, a demon who had been having a perfectly ordinary evening screamed and dropped their drink. For a moment, nothing moved. Then, from the bottom of the crater, a voice. Okay. Rude. And Lobo climbed out. 9 feet of chalk-white muscle, black leather, and attitude, brushing rubble off his shoulders like dandruff. He looked up at the red sky. He looked around at the buildings, the neon, the enormous flickering screens broadcasting some slick media empire's logo, 3 glowing symbols, a television, a heart, a spider, across the whole skyline. He sniffed the air. It smelled like sulfur and cheap perfume and other people's ambition. Huh? Said the main man. New digs. He did not know he was in the wrong hell. He did not know that no soul had ever arrived here the way he had, through the ceiling, uninvited, unprocessed, unowned. He did not know that in this particular hell, everything belonged to somebody. Every block, every soul, every square inch of neon carved up between overlords who had spent centuries clawing out their little kingdoms. He didn't know any of that, and in about 90 seconds, he wasn't going to care either, because a soul had just landed in someone else's territory without permission, and in this hell, that was the kind of thing that got noticed. High above the city, in a tower of black glass and cold blue light, the noticing had already begun. 3 screens, 3 faces watching the same feed, the crater, the dust, the enormous white lunatic climbing out of a hole in their streets like he owned the place. Who? Said Vox, the television-headed one, his screen crackling with irritation. Is that? And why is he in our district? Dunno, said Valentino, lounging, uninterested, cigarette smoke curling from too many hands. Send someone to squash him. It's a Tuesday. I gotta shoot. But the third figure in the room wasn't looking at the crater. She was looking at something else entirely. At the numbers. At the corner of the feed where the view count was climbing. Not climbing. Erupting. A raw phone video some sinner had shot of a 9-foot maniac punching a hole in reality, and it was spreading across hell's networks faster than anything she had ever, in all her damnation, managed to push. Velvette tilted her head. Something sharp and interested moved behind her eyes. No, she said quietly, mostly to herself. No, don't squash him, not yet. Vel, look at the engagement, you absolute muppets. She flicked her wrist and the numbers bloomed across every screen in the room, and even Valentino sat up a little. 1 clip, 30 seconds. He's already outperforming everything we posted this month. A slow smile. I don't want him squashed. I want to know who he is. She was, at that moment, the first being in this hell to look at the most destructive creature in all of creation and see not a threat, not a mess, not a Tuesday problem, but an opportunity. She would not be the last, but she would be the one who mattered. Down in the street, oblivious, Lobo cracked his neck, spotted a bar with its lights still on across the road, and decided that the very first order of business in his brand new afterlife was going to be a very large, very cold drink. The second order of business, though he didn't know it yet, was going to find him. The bar was called the Rusty Halo, and it was, by the standards of Pentagram City, a perfectly respectable dive, which is to say the floor was sticky, the lighting was the color of a bruise, and roughly a third of the clientele were actively committing crimes at any given moment. Lobo loved it immediately. He shouldered through the door hard enough to take it off one hinge. surveyed the room the way a general surveys a battlefield, and made directly for the bar, where a nervous-looking demon with the head of a goat was polishing a glass that did not need polishing. "You," Lobo announced, dropping onto a stool that groaned in protest under 9 feet of Czarnian, "are gonna pour me the biggest drink you got. Then you're gonna pour me a bigger one. Then we'll talk about a third." The goat demon's eyes darted to the crater visible through the broken window, then back to the enormous white nightmare sitting at his bar, then back to the crater. Was that you?" "Depends." Lobo grinned, all teeth. "Somebody mad about it? I'll get your drink. Now we're friends." He got about 4 sips into the biggest, most radioactive-looking drink the rusty halo could produce, before the friends of the other kind showed up. They came in a convoy, 3 black cars with tinted windows and the Vees logo stamped on the doors, disgorging perhaps a dozen demons in matching suits, the kind of muscle a media empire keeps on retainer for exactly this sort of "someone landed in our district and needs to be made an example of" occasion. They fanned out across the street with the practiced ease of people who did this often and had never once lost. Their leader, a broad, shark-toothed enforcer with brass knuckles on all 4 hands, kicked open what remained of the rusty halo's door and pointed one meaty finger at the back of Lobo's head. "You," the enforcer growled. "Crater. Street. That's V property you cracked open. Funny man. The bosses want a word, and the word is pay up or get taken apart." Lobo did not turn around. He took another long, unbothered sip of his drink. "I'm gonna give you one chance," he said, to the mirror behind the bar, "to walk back out that door, drive your little clown cars home, and tell your bosses the main man's having a quiet night." He set the glass down. "One chance. On account of I'm in a good mood, and this drink's actually pretty decent." The enforcer laughed. Behind him, 12 demons laughed. It was the laugh of people who genuinely could not conceive of a universe in which they lost. "Aw," said Lobo. "Ya used it up." What happened next took 11 seconds, and it would later be studied, frame by frame, in slow motion, on every screen in hell, as a kind of masterclass. Not a fight. A fight implies 2 sides. This was closer to a natural disaster with a sense of humor. Lobo came off the bar stool without appearing to stand up, the way an avalanche doesn't so much begin as simply occur. He had a chain in his hand. Nobody saw where it came from. It was just suddenly there, hook glinting, and the first 3 demons went through the far wall before the enforcer had finished laughing. He took a brass knuckle punch to the jaw that would have shattered a skull, turned his head with it, and said, delighted, "Ooh, that one had some mustard," before returning the favor and folding the enforcer clean in half over the bar. The rest tried to run. This was, in fairness, the correct instinct. It did not work, because Lobo was faster than all of them and, more to the point, was enjoying himself. And there is nothing on any world in any hell more dangerous than Lobo enjoying himself. 11 seconds, 12 demons, 1 enforcer, whimpering, embedded in the ceiling. Lobo sat back down. His drink hadn't even finished settling. He picked it up, took a sip, and nodded at the goat demon bartender, who had not moved a single muscle throughout the entire ordeal, and was now staring at Lobo, with the wide, glassy eyes of a man recalculating his entire understanding of reality. "Told ya, it was a good mood," said Lobo. "Ya should have seen the bad one." Up in the tower of black glass, the good mood was going viral. Some sinner across the street had filmed the whole thing through the rusty halo's broken window, and the clip hit Hell's networks before the enforcer had finished sliding out of the ceiling. 11 seconds of a 9-foot lunatic dismantling a full V-muscle detail without spilling his drink. It was, in the cold and clinical language of the media empire that had just been humiliated, the single most engaging piece of content the Vees had ever failed to produce themselves. Vox was not thinking about engagement. Vox's screen had gone a furious static shot red. That's ours. That's a full detail. He went through a dozen of my guys like they were. Val, are you seeing this? Valentino examined a nail. He's got a look. Tall. I could work with a look like that. He humiliated us. On our own feeds. In our own district. Vox's voice climbed into the register of a man whose entire identity was built on control, and had just watched a stranger crater it, literally, in front of all of hell. Send everyone. Send the exorcist contracts. Send. I want him deleted. I want the footage deleted. You want, said Velvette, to calm down before you give yourself a virus. She had not raised her voice. She rarely needed to. She was sitting exactly where she'd been sitting when the crater opened, one leg crossed over the other, phone in hand, and she had watched all 11 seconds 4 times now. Not the way Vox watched it, as a wound. She watched it the way a jeweler watches light move through a stone she has not yet figured out how to price. He went through your guys, she said, like they were tissue paper. Vox, sit with that. Nobody does that. Not Carmilla's people, not the radio creep, not Lucifer's little enforcers. This thing walked into our district and did that, on camera, for free, and the whole of hell just watched. She finally looked up, and her eyes were bright with something that was not anger at all. And your instinct is to delete it. He attacked. He's the most powerful thing to hit this city in a century, and you want to throw him away because he bruised your ego. She stood, smoothing her dress, already halfway to a decision the boys hadn't even seen coming. You two do whatever you want. Send more muscle. Watch it not work, but I'm not sending anyone. Vox's screen flickered. Then what are you doing? Velvette was already walking toward the elevator, phone tucked away. That sharp, interested thing behind her eyes now sharpened all the way to a point. I'm going to go introduce myself, she said, properly, without the muscle. The elevator doors opened. Because everyone in this whole stupid city is going to look at that man and see a weapon to point at somebody. She stepped in, and I'm going to be the one who walks up and asks if he wants a manager. The doors closed on Vox mid-splutter, which was, as far as Velvette was concerned, the best part. Back at the Rusty Halo, Lobo had progressed to his 3rd drink and was in the middle of teaching the goat demon bartender a Czarnian drinking song, most of which was legally actionable in several galaxies, when the door opened for the 2nd time that evening. He didn't turn around. He'd assumed it was more muscle. Ceiling's getting crowded, pal, he said cheerfully, reaching for his chain. Hope you brought friends, that last batch barely. Oh, put the toy away. I'm not here to fight you. The voice was crisp, bored, and entirely unafraid, which was novel enough that Lobo actually turned around. And there she was, small, comically small next to him, barely up to his ribcage, impeccably dressed, arms folded, standing amid the wreckage of a dozen demons like it was a mildly inconvenient puddle. She looked him up and down, with the frank, assessing stare of someone pricing a handbag, and whatever she concluded, she didn't share. You, said Velvette, have made an absolute mess of my associate's evening. Congratulations. It's the funniest thing I've watched all year. Lobo blinked, then he grinned, a different grin than the one he'd given the enforcer. That one had been an invitation to violence. This one was something closer to interest. You're not running, he observed. Why would I run? She picked her way over an unconscious suit and hopped up onto the stool beside him, which put the top of her head roughly level with his shoulder. You only hit people who swing first. You gave those idiots a warning. I watched the footage. You gave them a whole speech. You're not a mad dog. You're just bored, and nobody's ever bored and polite at the same time unless they've got a code. She snapped her fingers at the bartender. Whatever he's having, and one for me, he's paying. I am, said Lobo. You broke the man's door. You broke the man's door. It's the least you can do. She turned on the stool to face him fully, and there was not one atom of fear in her. And Lobo, who had spent his entire existence being feared, hunted, worshipped, or fled from, and had grown catastrophically bored of all 4, found that he could not stop looking at her. All right, he said slowly, I'll bite. Who are you? And what I want? And why ain't you screaming like the rest of this dump? Velvette smiled. It was a very good smile. She'd practiced it in a lot of mirrors. My name's Velvette, she said. I run the part of this city that actually matters, the feeds, the fashion, the face of the whole operation, and what I want. She accepted the 2 drinks from the trembling bartender, slid the enormous one to Lobo, kept the small one for herself, and raised it in a toast. Is about 5 minutes of your time, because I just watched you become the most viewed thing in hell without even trying, and I have a proposal that I think a big, handsome catastrophe like yourself is going to find very, very hard to say no to. Lobo looked at the drink. He looked at the tiny, fearless woman holding it. He looked, for one brief second, genuinely, honestly intrigued, an expression his face had nearly forgotten how to make. Then he clinked his glass against hers, hard enough to crack it, and downed the whole thing in one go. "Lady," said the main man, "you got your 5 minutes." He had absolutely no idea what he was agreeing to. Neither, in fairness, did she. Not really, not yet. But somewhere between that cracked glass and that fearless smile, two of the most transactional beings in all of creation had just sat down at the same bar, and neither one of them was going to walk away from it unchanged. The pitch was next, and the pitch was going to change everything. The 5 minutes became an hour. The hour became a bottle. The bottle became a project. Velvette had pitched to a lot of people in her time. Investors, overlords, sinners she wanted to sign, sinners she wanted to ruin. Vox on a bad day, which was its own special category of pitching. She knew how to read a room and shape a room and, when necessary, gently lie to a room until it agreed with her. She had a whole gearbox of techniques. She used exactly none of them on Lobo, because within about 90 seconds, she'd worked out that they wouldn't land. You couldn't flatter him. His ego was already a fully formed structure visible from orbit, and anything she added would just bounce off. You couldn't intimidate him. Nothing in this hell, or any other, could, and pretending otherwise would only make her look stupid, which was the one thing she refused to look. And you couldn't bore him, which was the real trap, because Lobo's boredom was a physical force, and she'd watched what it did to a dozen suits. So she did the only thing left. She told him the truth, and she made the truth fun. Here's the situation, big guy. She'd swiveled her stool to face him and was ticking points off on her fingers. Drink balanced in her other hand. You're new. You landed in the single most territorial city in creation. Every block, every soul, every square inch is owned by somebody. And you cratered down in the middle of the most owned part of all of it. Mine. Ours. The Vees'. Don't much care whose it is, Lobo observed. I know you don't. That's the problem. And it's also the whole opportunity. So shut up and let me cook. She said it without a flicker of fear, and Lobo, to his own mild surprise, shut up. You don't care whose territory it is. But everyone else in this city cares, desperately, all the time. Because that's the only game down here. Who owns what? Who's climbing? Who's slipping? It's all clout and turf and standing, forever, till the sun burns out. She leaned in. And you just walked in and proved you're outside the whole game. Nobody owns you. Nobody can. You went through a full detail like wet cardboard and didn't spill your pint. Was a good pint. It was a terrible pint. This bar is a health violation. That's not the point. She waved it off. The point is that right now, tonight, every overlord in this city is looking at that footage and having the exact same thought Vox had. How do I point that at my enemies? They're already scheming. By tomorrow you'll have offers, allegiances, contracts. Some idiot will try to marry you off to a daughter, watch. And every single one of them will be trying to bolt you onto their machine like a weapon they get to aim. Lobo made a face. Sounds boring. It's incredibly boring. That's my whole pitch. Keep up. And here she smiled, because this was the part she'd built the whole thing toward. The hook under the hook. Everyone's going to offer to use you. I'm the only one who's going to offer to make you famous. There was a pause. Lobo squinted at her. I'm already famous. I'm the main man. They write songs about me. Bad ones mostly, but not here you're not. She said it flat, and it landed, because it was true. Here, you're a guy who fell out of the sky yesterday. Blank slate. And I run the feeds. All of them. The fashion, the broadcasts, the trends. The whole face of this city runs through my department. I don't want to point you at anybody. Boring. I want to put you on every screen in hell. I want your face, your name, your whole ridiculous vibe. She gestured at the entirety of him, moving more product and more clout than anything that's ever come out of this city. You don't fight my wars. You don't take my orders. You just be the loudest, biggest, most watched thing in the afterlife, which, let's be honest, sunshine, you were going to do anyway. I just make it pay. She sat back. She let it breathe. She was good at this. Lobo was quiet for a long moment. He turned his glass slowly in one enormous hand, And for once, his face wasn't doing the grin or the boredom or the barely restrained violence. It was doing something rarer. It was thinking. Because the little woman had, without knowing it, put her manicured finger on the exact bruise the main man never let anyone see. He wasn't afraid of dying. He couldn't die, that was the joke. He wasn't afraid of losing. He never lost. What Lobo was afraid of, the one and only thing, the thing that chased him across galaxies and drove him to pick fights with gods, was the yawning, bottomless, eternal possibility of being bored, of having done everything, beaten everyone, seen every fight worth having, and being left with nothing but forever. And here was this fearless little scrap of a woman offering him a brand new hell to be the loudest thing in. "Let me get this straight," he said slowly. "No orders. No orders. You're not muscle. Muscle's cheap. I've got dozens. You saw how that went." A dry look at the ceiling, where the enforcer had finally been peeled loose. "Your talent. No fightin' your wars. Fight whoever you want. I genuinely do not care who you punch. I'll probably film it. And I get," he frowned, working it out, a man who had never in his life negotiated for anything, because he'd always just taken it. "What do I get, exactly?" Velvette had been waiting for this, and she delivered it like the closer it was, ticking it off one last finger at a time. Booze, the good stuff, not this paint stripper, top shelf and endless, on the house, forever, a city that watches everything you do, and cheers. Enemies worth punching, lined up and delivered to your door, because trust me, once you're mine, the other overlords are going to hate you, and hating you is going to be a very entertaining full-time job for a lot of very stupid people. She let the pause stretch. And me. Someone in your corner who isn't scared of you, isn't trying to aim you, and isn't going to bore you. I've got a lot of qualities. Catastrophe. But boring has never once been one of them. Lobo looked at her. She looked back, unblinking, not a scrap of fear. And somewhere in the vast, self-satisfied, endlessly bored engine of the main man's brain, a gear that had been grinding empty for about 4,000 years, finally caught on something. "Huh," said Lobo. "Huh, good or huh bad?" "Huh," he admitted, interested. He set the glass down. "Y'all know what you're asking, right? You bring me in. You put my face on everything. And your bosses, the TV and the moth. They're gonna lose their little minds. I ain't stupid, lady. I know a power play when one's sitting on the stool next to me, buying me drinks I'm apparently paying for." He grinned, slow and knowing. "This ain't just about clout. You're using me to get one up on your own guys." For half a second, just half, Velvette's smooth expression flickered. Because he was right, and she hadn't expected the walking apocalypse to clock it that fast. Vox and Valentino had been treating her like the kid of the operation for a century, the junior partner, the one who handled the fun stuff while the boys made the real decisions, and a weapon that only answered to her, a walking catastrophe that the boys couldn't out-scheme, out-charm, or out-muscle, was worth more to Velvette than every feed she'd ever run. "Maybe," she allowed. "Is that a problem?" Lobo threw back his head and laughed, a real one, huge and delighted, rattling the bottles behind the bar. "Problem? Lady, that's the best part." He slammed a hand down on the bar hard enough to crack the wood. "You want to use me to stick it to the two blowhards who think they run this dump? Now you're speaking my language. I love a good backstab. I've thrown co-workers into stars for less fun than that." He wiped a tear of mirth from one eye. Okay, I'm in. Whatever you're selling, I'm buying. Let's do it. Let's put my beautiful face on every screen in this garbage city and watch your bosses pop a gasket." "But," said Velvette, holding up one finger, because she hadn't clawed her way to the top of a media empire by letting a deal close before the terms were locked. "If we do this, we do it right. It has to be airtight, binding, public, something Vox can't wriggle out of with a contract clause and Valentino can't buy his way around. Something that ties you to me, to my department, my brand, so tight that the boys can't touch it, and every overlord in hell knows exactly whose talent you are." She tapped her chin, and Lobo could actually see the gears turning, could see her reaching for the biggest, most unbreakable, most viral bond a media empire could possibly manufacture. It has to be the kind of thing that breaks the whole internet the second we announce it. A stunt so big, nobody can ignore it, and nobody can undo it. And that was the moment. Right there. If you wanted to point to the exact instant the whole magnificent disaster of this story locked into place, it was that one. Velvette, chin on her manicured hand, chasing the biggest possible headline, and Lobo, 3 sheets to the wind, and loving every second, deciding he was going to out-clever the clever little woman who thought she was managing him. Because Lobo had heard binding, he'd heard airtight, public, can't undo it, and in the vast drunken vault of everything the main man knew about 1,000 dead cultures and 10,000 alien customs, one particular idea came shambling up out of the dark, wearing a party hat. He knew a bond like that, an old one, a Czarnian one, the most airtight, unbreakable, cosmically notarized contract his extinct and extremely litigious people had ever devised. And the beautiful part, the part that made him grin like a shark, was that he was certain it was just a ceremonial gag, a bit, a joke his people used to play. Say the words, break some glass, gross out the in-laws. Nobody actually meant it. She wanted a viral stunt she could point to. He'd give her a viral stunt, all right, the biggest, dumbest, most attention-grabbing binding contract in the galaxy, and he'd get to watch the little schemer's face when she realized the main man had outstunted her at her own game. 2 con artists, 1 bar, neither one clocking that the other was running the exact same play from the exact opposite direction. "Oh," said Lobo, very slowly, with the delight of a man who thinks he's just won something. "Binding, public, can't take it back." He leaned down, elbow on the bar, until his enormous grinning face was level with hers. "Sweetheart, have I got the contract for you?" Velvette's eyes narrowed with pure professional interest. "Go on. Back on my rock," said the last Czarnian. "We had this little ceremony." The thing about a good lie is that it works best when it's 90% true. Lobo knew this instinctively, the way he knew how to throw a punch or find the nearest bar. And so the story he told Velvette over the next 20 minutes was mostly honest, which made the one dishonest part slide down easy. "So on Czarnia," he began, spinning his empty glass, "we had this whole thing about bonds, contracts. My people were the most litigious sons of bitches in the galaxy. We'd sue each other over a parking spot, sue the guy who sold us the parking spot, then sue the judge for fun. Point is, we took agreements real serious, all true. And the most serious agreement of all, the big one, the one you couldn't weasel out of no matter how good your lawyer was, we called it the Carnivac." He made the word up. Well, he thought he was making it up. That was the part he'd have his doubts about later. "The Carnivac," Velvette repeated, tasting it. "Sounds expensive." "Sounds like a headline, is what it sounds like." He grinned. "Here's the deal. 2 people say the words, they mix a little blood. Don't make that face, princess. It's ceremonial. It barely stings. And boom, bound, in front of everybody. Public, permanent, cosmic notarized, the whole 9. No takebacks, no annulment, no clever little clause your TV buddy can hide behind. Airtight." He spread his hands, the very picture of a man offering a woman a bridge he fully intends to sell her. "It's the most binding contract my whole dead race ever came up with. Ties 2 names together so tight, not even a god can pry 'em apart." Every word of that was true. He just left off the last word. The word was marriage. On Czarnia, the Carnivac wasn't a business bond at all. It was the wedding rite, the real one, the cosmically enforced till the heat death of the universe kind that his people had engineered to be genuinely, structurally unbreakable, specifically because Czarnians were such treacherous bastards that ordinary vows never held. But Lobo, in his infinite drunken cleverness, had convinced himself over the last 4,000 years that the whole thing was a gag, a bit his people did at parties. Because Lobo had never once meant it, had said the words maybe twice, both times as jokes, both times to women who'd been trying to swindle him, and both those marriages had ended in explosions, and at least one of them in a small war, so as far as he was concerned the Carnivac was cosmic prank calligraphy. Sounds impressive, means nothing. He was going to give the little schemer the most impressive sounding, most viral, most legally nothing, binding contract in the galaxy. She'd get her headline. He'd get to watch her face when she found out it was ceremonial fluff. He'd win. "So it's basically," Velvette said slowly, and he could see her already reframing it into a press release. An unbreakable, public, blood-sworn, ancient alien bond between the most viewed being in hell and the woman who runs hell's biggest media empire. Her eyes had gone bright and fixed and a little bit terrifying. Announced live, on every screen, all at once. When you put it like that, said Lobo. Yeah, that's not a stunt, Velvette breathed. That's the biggest content event in the history of the afterlife. And here was where her con locked in, because Velvette had heard unbreakable and public and permanent and thought, perfect. Not because she wanted to be tied to a 9-foot alien lunatic for eternity, please, but because a bond Vox and Valentino literally could not undo was exactly, precisely the airtight leash on her new asset that she needed. If she just signed Lobo, the boys would spend a century trying to poach him, buy him, contract clause him out from under her. But an ancient blood oath that not even a god could break, that they couldn't touch. Lobo would be hers, provably, permanently, on the record, and there'd be nothing the two of them could do but seethe. She thought she was manufacturing a marketing bond. He thought he was manufacturing a joke. Neither of them thought, even for 1 second, the word married, because both of them were far too busy being clever to notice they were being idiots. It barely stings, you said. She held out one small, perfectly manicured hand, palm up, businesslike. The blood part. Barely. He absolutely did not know if that was true. He'd never done it sober. Then let's do it. She shook on it, her whole hand disappearing inside his, and grinned up at him with a media executive's cold delight. And Lobo grinned back with a con man's. And the deal, such as it was struck. Give me 48 hours. I'm going to book something obscene. She booked something obscene. Velvette did not do things by halves, and she certainly wasn't going to do the single biggest content event in afterlife history by halves. In 48 hours, she requisitioned the largest venue in Pentagram City, a colossal amphitheater the Vees used for their splashiest broadcasts, draped the entire thing in a bespoke aesthetic she designed herself somewhere around 4 a.m., leather and lace and blood-red neon, brutalist romance she called it, and made 3 interns cry perfecting it, and blitzed every feed in hell with a countdown and a single teasing tagline, Hell's Biggest Wedding. Live, miss it and die again. She did not tell Vox and Valentino what it was. She let them find out from the feeds, same as everyone else, which was itself a small and delicious act of war. A wedding? Vox's shriek could be heard 3 floors down. You're, Velvette, you're marrying that thing that put a full detail through a wall. Why? Engagement's already at 40 million and climbing, Vox. She didn't look up from her tablet. Cope. Valentino, for his part, was mostly annoyed he wasn't officiating. Word spread through hell like a grease fire. Every overlord, every sinner, every hanger-on and hater and curious rubbernecker in the entire underworld tuned in, because the footage of the crater and the 11-second demolition had made Lobo the most talked-about creature in the afterlife, and now the most talked-about creature was marrying the woman who ran the talking. Carmilla Carmine watched with a frown. Alistair watched with an expression nobody could read. Down in a certain hotel, a certain bright-eyed princess watched and thought, that big fellow's got a whole story to him, I bet, and filed it away for later. Even Lucifer caught the tail end of it and muttered, "Who is that?" at a screen. Lobo, backstage, wearing a leather thing Velvette had put him in that he privately thought looked sick as hell, was having the time of his afterlife. "This is great," he told her, peering out at the roaring, packed amphitheater. "Look at 'em all. Whole city showed up to watch us do a bit. Your whole thing's gonna go, what's the word? Viral. And when it comes out, the Carnivac's just a party trick. That's another headline. We can milk this for weeks." Said Velvette, who was thinking the exact same thing about him, that when the honeymoon wore off, she'd have gotten the biggest launch in history, and a permanently signed asset, and could quietly let the marriage become a formality on paper while she reaped the leverage. When it comes out, it never meant anything, she thought. That's another news cycle. We can milk this for weeks. They stood there, side by side, in the wings of the biggest wedding in the history of hell, each one privately congratulating themselves on the enormous scam they were about to run on the other, and each one entirely, catastrophically wrong about which of them was the mark. It was, honestly, kind of beautiful. The ceremony itself was chaos, and hell loved it. Velvette had hired an officiant, some silver-tongued sinner who'd been a celebrity marriage broker in life, but Lobo waved him off halfway through and insisted on running the carnivac properly, which meant he did the whole thing himself, in a booming ceremonial voice, in a dead alien language, to an audience of millions who didn't understand a word and cheered every syllable. He produced a knife. Velvette, to her eternal credit, did not flinch. She held out her palm. He nicked his own. They pressed their hands together, and it barely stung, just like he'd promised, which was the one thing he'd been unsure about, and the one thing that turned out fine. What was not fine, what nobody in that entire amphitheater noticed, because it happened in a register beneath sight and sound, was what happened the instant their blood mixed and Lobo spoke the final word of the carnivac. The universe's machinery, way up in the seams of creation, the same machinery that had panicked and flung Lobo sideways into the wrong hell 3 days ago, stirred. Because the carnivac was real. It had always been real. It was, in point of fact, one of the oldest and most ironclad bonds the machinery recognized, engineered by a dead race, specifically to be enforced by cosmic law itself, and it did not care even slightly that both parties thought they were joking. It heard the words. It tasted the blood. It checked the paperwork. And it filed them, married, permanent, notarized, airtight, no takebacks. On stage, oblivious, Lobo threw both arms up as the crowd detonated into the loudest roar Pentagram City had ever produced, hauled his brand new, entirely real wife up onto one shoulder like a trophy, and bellowed, "We did it, hell." Drinks are on the Moth, and Valentino, somewhere in the VIP box, actually did have to buy the drinks, which was its own small tragedy, and Velvette, perched on the shoulder of the most powerful being in the afterlife, looking out at 40, no, 60, no. The number was climbing so fast, the counter was smoking. Million viewers. At the single biggest launch any media empire had ever achieved. At the airtight, unbreakable leash she'd just fastened on hell's deadliest asset. Laughed, out loud, delighted, genuinely, for the first time in longer than she could remember. She told herself it was the numbers. It was not entirely the numbers. Neither of them knew yet. It would take a while for the truth to catch up with them, that the joke was real, that the bond was cosmic, that the two most transactional creatures in all of creation had just accidentally, permanently, actually married each other in front of the entire underworld as a mutual publicity stunt. But the machinery knew. The machinery had it in writing, and upstairs and downstairs both, in the seams of two afterlives, something very old and very patient made a note that the one soul nobody could file had just tied himself to somebody, and started, very quietly, to wonder what to do about that. The morning after a wedding is traditionally a soft, glowing thing. Croissants, regret, someone asking where their other shoe went. The morning after this wedding, the tower of black glass sounded like a server farm having a nervous breakdown, because Vox was pacing the length of the boardroom, radiating enough static to fry every device in a 3-block radius, and had been doing so, without pause, for approximately 4 hours. She didn't ask me, he was saying, for perhaps the 40th time, to nobody, to the room, to the ceiling. 100 years, 100 years we build this empire, the three of us, and she goes and, on live television, Val, in front of everyone, she marries a walking nuclear incident, without so much as a text message. Valentino was draped across a chaise, unbothered, watching the replay on a loop with the vague appreciation of a man admiring someone else's expensive car. It's a good look, though. The leather, she styled him well. That's your takeaway. I'm just saying. Valentino exhaled a plume of smoke. The kid's got range. Bit of a power grab, sure, but an impressive one. He tilted his head. You're only this mad, Vox, because it's exactly what you would have done. And she did it first, and cleaner, and got 60 million views doing it. Vox's screen went to solid, furious static, which was, in the language of Vox, a yes. Because that was the wound, wasn't it? Not the marriage, the maneuver. For 100 years, the arrangement had been unspoken but ironclad. Vox and Valentino made the real decisions, ran the real power, and Velvette handled the fun stuff, the fashion, the feeds, the youth vote, the part of the empire the boys privately considered decorative. She was the kid, the junior partner, the one you gave the sparkly assignments to keep her busy. And in one single televised stroke, the kid had acquired a weapon that neither of them could buy, break, out-scheme, or even approach, and had done it so publicly, so airtight, so cleanly, that there wasn't one thing either of them could do about it, except sit in a boardroom at 9 in the morning and seethe. We poach him, Vox decided. We make him a better offer. Everyone's got a price. He can't be bought, sugar. He fell out of the sky with nothing, and doesn't want anything. That's the whole problem with him. Valentino examined a nail. You can't leverage a man who's got no leverage. Then we drive a wedge between the unkillable god of murder and the only person in hell he seems to like. Valentino finally sat up, and for the first time there was something serious under the languor, something cold. Careful, Vox. Vel's the kid until she isn't. And right now she's got the biggest gun in the afterlife pointed nowhere in particular, which is a lot better for us than the day she decides to point it somewhere. He stubbed out his cigarette. So here's my advice, which you won't take. Smile. Congratulate her. Buy the happy couple a very nice gift. And figure out what she wants before she figures out she can just take it. What she wanted was the problem, because Velvette didn't know yet either. She'd woken up in her own penthouse, separate from her new husband, thank you. The Carnivac had not come with a cohabitation clause, and she had a brand to run, to a phone that had not stopped buzzing since the ceremony. The numbers were obscene. The launch had worked beyond her wildest projections. Every metric she'd ever cared about was on fire in the best possible way, and the whole of hell was talking about exactly one thing, and that thing had her name attached to it. She should have felt triumphant. She did feel triumphant. She just also felt, somewhere around her third coffee, a small and deeply unwelcome flicker of something she couldn't name, when the footage cut to Lobo hauling her onto his shoulder and bellowing, "We did it, hell," and she'd deleted that flicker from her mind, with the ruthless efficiency of a woman deleting an unflattering photo, and gotten back to work. Work, this morning, involved 3 separate problems, and she assessed them the way she assessed everything, coldly, in order of importance. Problem 1, the boys. Vox was going to lose his mind, already had, judging by the static she could practically feel through the building's wiring, and Valentino was going to be sly about it, which was worse. She'd humiliated them, deliberately. That had felt incredible in the moment and was going to be a management issue for approximately the next decade. She was fine with that. She'd been waiting 100 years for a reason to stop being the kid, and now she had a 9-foot one. Problem 2, leverage. This was the fun problem. She now, provably and permanently, controlled the single most powerful entity in the afterlife. She didn't fully know what to do with that yet. Pointing him at things felt crude, and anyway he'd made it clear he didn't take orders. But the mere fact of him, standing behind her, unkillable, and hers, rearranged every power dynamic in the city. She could feel the whole board tilting toward her. It was intoxicating. Problem 3. Problem 3 was the one she didn't have a column for. Problem 3 was that at some point during the reception, after the ceremony, after the drinks, somewhere around 3 a.m. when the amphitheater had emptied out, and it was just the two of them and a bottle of something Valentino had been forced to pay for, Lobo had told her about Czarnia. Not the bit, not the con, the real thing, drunk and unguarded, in a voice she hadn't heard him use before, about being the last one, about doing it himself, about 4,000 years of being the loudest thing in every room, precisely because the second a room went quiet, the quiet had teeth, and there was nobody left who remembered his people, or his language, or the songs, or the parking spot lawsuits, or any of it, because he'd made very sure of that personally, and now he had forever and nobody to spend it on. And Velvette, who was transactional, who was cold, who had clawed her way to the top of a media empire by never once caring about anything she couldn't monetize, had listened to the most dangerous being in creation describe being catastrophically lonely, and had not said anything clever, and had not filmed it, and had, for reasons she refused to examine, just stayed and listened, until he fell asleep mid-sentence and she'd covered the enormous idiot with her own coat, which didn't remotely fit him, and left before he woke up. She deleted that from her mind, too. It did not stay deleted. That was the thing about problem 3. It kept coming back. Lobo, for his part, woke up on the floor of the amphitheater around noon, wearing a woman's coat that fit him like a napkin, with the best hangover he'd had in a century, and absolutely no problem, 3 flicker whatsoever, because Lobo did not do introspection before at least his 4th drink of the day. He did, however, notice the coat. He held it up. He looked at it for a long moment. "Huh," said the main man to the empty amphitheater. Then he did something he would have vigorously denied under torture. He folded it, carefully, and tucked it under one arm to give back later, and did not think about why he wasn't just leaving it on the floor, because thinking about why was problem 3 territory, and Lobo had a strict policy about that. He was still standing there, holding a tiny folded coat and frowning at nothing, when his brand new marriage stopped being a private matter and became, very abruptly, everyone's business. Because it turned out that a wedding of that size, broadcast on every screen in hell, watched by 60-some million souls, including certain viewers in certain high places who Velvette had not been thinking about at all when she booked the amphitheater, does not go unnoticed by the powers that actually run the underworld. Velvette had been playing the local game, turf and clout, and sticking it to Vox. She had not been thinking about the big game, about the fact that she'd just put the one soul heaven and hell had both rejected onto every screen in creation, tied him to herself with an ancient cosmic bond, and announced it, loudly, to an afterlife, where the management upstairs and downstairs had spent 3 days quietly asking each other the same nervous question. What do we do about the anomaly? And the answer they'd been leaning toward, ignore it, maybe it'll go away, had just been rendered impossible by a media executive with a flair for the dramatic and a 60 million view launch. The powers were watching now, all of them, and the honeymoon, such as it was over. Down in a certain hotel, meanwhile, a certain princess had finished her morning coffee, watched the wedding footage for the 4th time, gotten a truly terrible and wonderful idea, and started drafting an invitation. The invitation arrived by Demon Courier, on cardstock so aggressively cheerful it looked like it had been printed by a rainbow having a breakdown. Lobo squinted at it. It was covered in hand-drawn hearts, at least 3 exclamation points per sentence, and a little cartoon of a smiling apple that he found personally offensive on a level he couldn't articulate. "You are cordially invited," he read aloud, in the flat voice of a man reading a ransom note, "to the Hazbin Hotel, a safe and judgment-free space for souls seeking a fresh start. Redemption is possible. Everyone deserves a second chance. Free waffles." He turned it over. The back had more hearts. "The hell's a waffle?" "It's a trap," said Velvette, without looking up from her tablet. She'd come by his newly acquired penthouse, V-branded, top floor. She'd had it furnished in 11 hours, because a husband sleeping on an amphitheater floor was off-brand, to go over the week's content schedule, and had watched him open the thing with growing amusement. Charlie Morningstar, Lucifer's kid. She runs a little rehab project downtown. Thinks she can teach sinners to be good and get them into heaven. She said good, the way most people say herpes. It's a punchline, babe. Nobody takes it seriously. She's been at it for ages, and redeemed exactly 0 people. Lucifer's kid. Lobo's face lit up with the specific joy of a man who has just been handed a new toy. The devil's got a daughter who runs a hug hotel? When you say it like that. And she wants me to come get redeemed. He started to laugh. The big one. The bottle-rattling one. Me. The guy heaven kicked out for genocide. The guy hell kicked out for being too much of a pain in the ass. She wants to teach the main man to be good. He had to sit down. "Oh, I gotta go. I gotta go to this. This is the funniest thing that's happened to me since I got here. And babe, I got married for content 4 days ago. So that's a high bar." Velvette looked up. She'd been about to veto it. The hotel was a rival's turf, sort of. Or at least a wild card. And wild cards were bad for brand control. But she watched Lobo cackling at a waffle invitation. Watched the sheer delight on the face of a man she'd privately clocked as catastrophically lonely 4 nights ago, and did the math a different way. Content. she told herself. The main man crashes the Redemption Hotel. 60 million views. Easy. Charlie's harmless. And it gets him out of my hair for an afternoon. That was the reason. That was definitely the whole reason, and not any of the problem 3 reasons. Fine, she said, but you're wearing a mic, and if it's boring, you leave. Sweetheart, said Lobo, standing and pocketing the invitation. Nothing's boring when I show up. That's kinda the whole issue. The Hazbin Hotel was a tall, crooked, lovingly refurbished wreck of a building that looked like a haunted house, and a wedding cake had gotten married and had a very optimistic child. Lobo kicked the front doors open. He had, at this point, kicked open every door he'd encountered in this hell. It was becoming a signature, and bellowed into the lobby. All right, who wants to redeem a genocidal maniac? I got an invite. Something about waffles. There was a small crash from the upper landing, and then a young woman came pelting down the stairs with the unstoppable momentum of pure, uncut enthusiasm. Blonde, red-cheeked, a little pair of horns, and a smile so wide and so genuine, it actually gave Lobo pause, because he had met a great many smiles in his time, and almost none of them had been real. You came. Charlie Morningstar skidded to a halt in front of him, craned her neck all the way back to look up at 9 feet of Czarnian, and did not flinch, wilt, or reconsider even slightly. Oh my gosh, you actually came. I wasn't sure you'd... Okay. Hi, welcome to the Hazbin Hotel. I'm Charlie. I'm so glad you're here. This is... Okay, so I have to be honest. When I saw your whole, situation, I got so excited I could barely... My situation. You got rejected by heaven and hell. She said it like it was the most wonderful news anyone had ever received. Behind her, a tall, cat-faced demon with a permanent expression of, I am too old and sober for this, pinched the bridge of her nose. Do you understand what that means? Nobody's ever done that. You don't fit anywhere, which means the whole system doesn't know what to do with you, which means, and stay with me here, you're proof. Lobo, who had walked in expecting a joke he could laugh at, found himself on the back foot for possibly the first time since arriving in this hell. Proof of what, kid? That the rules aren't fixed. Charlie's eyes were shining. Everyone down here thinks it's hopeless. Once you're a sinner forever. Heaven's closed, that's it, no takebacks. But you, heaven and hell both looked at their own rule books and went, nope, doesn't apply. And if the rules can bend for the worst person in all of creation, she pointed at him, beaming, entirely sincere, then they can bend for anybody. If I can redeem you, I can redeem everyone. You're not a lost cause, mister. You're the best thing that's ever walked through that door. There was a silence. The cat demon, Husk, Lobo would later learn, who ran the bar and had opinions, muttered, Charlie, that is the guy who genocided his own planet as a homework assignment. Best thing that's ever walked through that door, Charlie repeated, louder, without breaking eye contact. And Lobo, the main man, last of the Czarnians, the being that 2 afterlives had unanimously refused, who had spent 4,000 years being feared and hunted and worshipped and fled from, and who had come here specifically to laugh at this exact person, did not laugh. Because he genuinely could not remember the last time anyone in the entire universe had looked at him and seen anything other than a weapon, a threat, a monster, or an asset. Velvette saw an asset, a fond one, lately, but an asset. Everyone else saw a monster. And here was this ridiculous, relentless, radiant little idiot looking up at the worst thing in creation and seeing hope, being genuinely, uncynically glad he existed, not because of what he could do for her, just because. It threw him completely. Ya know, he said slowly, and there was something almost wary in it, the wariness of a man who's found a trap so weird he can't figure out what it's for. Usually when somebody's this happy to see me, it's 'cause they want me to kill somebody. I don't want you to kill anybody, Charlie gasped, delighted, taking this as tremendous progress. See? That's already growth. Come in, sit down. Do you want a waffle? I'll explain everything. He stayed for 4 hours. He told himself, and later told Velvette, that he stayed because it was hilarious, and parts of it genuinely were. The redemption exercises were a disaster. Trust falls do not work when one party weighs as much as a small truck, and the other party is a cat demon who will absolutely let you hit the floor. Anger management went poorly. Group sharing circle went extremely poorly, though the others, a nervous porn star turned hotel employee, a rowdy one-eyed spider, a fallen angel who kept trying to fight Lobo and whom Lobo found charming, all agreed it was the most entertaining sharing circle they'd ever had. But underneath the chaos, something kept snagging at him that he couldn't laugh off. Charlie meant it. Every ludicrous, doomed, sincere word. She wasn't running an angle. She wasn't managing him. She wasn't scared. She just, with her whole entire heart, believed that even he could be something better than what he was. And she was so obviously, cheerfully, catastrophically going to fail at it, and she was going to keep trying anyway, forever, because that was just who she was. Lobo had spent 4,000 years around people who wanted things from him. He did not have a category for a person who just wanted good things for him, expected nothing back, and would not be discouraged. "You're gonna fail, kid," he told her on the way out, and he wasn't being cruel. For Lobo, it was almost gentle. "I ain't redeemable. I like being me. I'm real good at it." "That's okay," Charlie chirped, walking him to the door, undeterred, luminous. "You came once. You'll come back. That's how it starts. I've got time." She beamed up at him. "And hey, you didn't kill anybody the whole visit. That's a personal best, right? For you?" Lobo opened his mouth to say something withering. What came out, to his own profound horror, was, "Yeah, guess it is." He left quickly after that, before the feeling could get any worse. And he did not tell Velvette about that last part. He told her about the trust falls, and Husk letting the fallen angel hit the floor, and the sharing circle, and she laughed, and it was great content, and the clip did 60 million views just like she'd predicted. But he kept the other part, the part where a stranger had looked at the worst thing in creation and been glad. He folded it up and tucked it away somewhere, the same drawer, it turned out, where he'd put a coat that didn't fit him. The drawer was getting fuller. Lobo was doing his level best not to notice. Across town, in his tower of static and spite, someone else had been watching the hotel footage, not laughing, not for content, but with the cold, narrow attention of a predator who has just spotted a much bigger predator and is beginning, for the very first time, to feel afraid. There are, in any hell, a small number of beings that everyone else is quietly afraid of, not the loud ones. The loud ones you can see coming, the quiet ones, the ones who smile too much and never raise their voice and seem to know things they have no business knowing, and whose power has no visible floor, so that everyone privately assumes it has no ceiling either. In this hell, the quiet one was Alastor, the radio demon, an overlord who'd arrived decades ago, dismantled half the establishment in a single afternoon, and then simply stopped, declined to explain himself, declined to expand, declined to die, and had spent the intervening years being unsettlingly polite to everyone, while broadcasting an aura of, "I could end you, and it would not change my expression." Even Vox, who hated him with the specific fury of a man hating his own reflection, was careful around Alastor. Everyone was careful around Alastor. Everyone except, as it turned out, the main man, who had never in his life been careful around anything, and wasn't about to start for a guy with a radio dial for a mood ring. They met at the hotel, of course. Alastor lived there, in the loose way that Alastor did anything, drifting through the place like a rumor with a smile. Lobo, against his own stated intentions, had come back. For the content, he insisted, and Velvette let him, because the content was real, and problem 3 was not a thing she was acknowledging, and the two of them ended up in the hotel's shabby grand parlor at the same time, and the temperature of the room dropped about 4 degrees, and everyone else present quietly found reasons to be elsewhere. Because the staff had seen how Alastor made other overlords squirm, and they'd seen how Lobo made everyone squirm, and the collision of the two most unsquirmable entities in hell in one small parlor felt, correctly, like something to watch from behind furniture. "Well, well, well," Alastor's voice arrived with the faint crackle of old radio, that ever-present grin fixed in place, eyes gleaming with a curiosity he did not usually bother to feel. The famous newcomer, the soul that doesn't fit. "I confess, my large friend, you have been the most interesting thing to happen to this dreary little pit in quite some time." He drifted a slow circle, appraising, rejected by heaven, Rejected by hell. Married for publicity. You have style. I approve. Lobo, sprawled across a couch built for smaller demons, cracked one eye. You the radio guy? Velvette said there was a radio guy. Said everybody's scared of you. He looked Alastor up and down. The pinstripes, the grin, the deerish antlers, the whole vaudeville menace package. He was entirely unimpressed. Ya look like a haunted barbershop quartet. The room, from behind its various pieces of furniture, held its breath. Nobody talked to Alastor like that. Nobody talked to Alastor like anything, mostly because Alastor's response to disrespect was famously creative and famously final. Alastor's grin did not move, but something behind his eyes sharpened, went keen and delighted. The look of a chess player who's been playing children for years and has just seen someone sit down across the board who might actually make him think. A barbershop quartet, he repeated, and, remarkably, laughed. A real crackle of static-laced amusement. Oh, I like you. Do you know, I don't think anyone's insulted me to my face in 11 years. The last one who tried is a hat stand now. He leaned in, shadows lengthening around him in a way that would have sent any other demon in hell fleeing for the exits. Aren't you afraid of me, friend? Everyone's afraid of me. It's rather the point. Lobo looked at the lengthening shadows. He looked at the sharpening grin. He looked at the aura of bottomless menace that had cowed an entire underworld. Then he yawned. Pal, said the last Czarnian, I've been thrown into a sun. On purpose. By people who meant it. Grew right back, walked out of the star, and beat him to death with their own arms. He settled deeper into the couch. You want to turn me into a hat stand? Knock yourself out. I'll grow back from the splinters and then we'll see whose barbershop's haunted. He grinned, huge and genuine. But you ain't gonna. 'Cause I'm the first guy in this whole dump who ain't boring you, and you know it, and turning me into furniture'd be the most boring thing you ever did. There was a long, crackling silence, and then Alastor did something the hotel staff would talk about for weeks afterward, in hushed and disbelieving tones. He sat down, across from Lobo, and his grin, for once, looked less like a threat and more like an actual smile. You're quite right, said the radio demon, with something that was almost, unbelievably, warmth. It would be terribly boring. And I do so hate being bored. He steepled his fingers. Tell me, friend, do you play cards? They did play cards. And chess. And a Czarnian game Lobo tried to explain, that appeared to have no rules, except the loser gets thrown through something, which Alastor found charming. Over the following weeks, the two of them fell into an association that nobody else in hell could quite parse, and everybody else in hell found faintly terrifying. The two most powerful, most unsettling, most fundamentally immovable beings in the underworld, hanging around together, needling each other, neither one able to get the smallest rise out of the other, both enormously and privately delighted about it. Because that was the thing they had in common, the thing that made the strange friendship work. They were both bored. Cosmically, chronically, 4,000 and some decades bored. Alastor had spent his whole afterlife as the scariest thing in every room, which sounds like power and is, but which also means you never once get surprised, never get challenged, never meet anyone who can make you feel anything but the dull satisfaction of watching people flinch. And Lobo had spent 4,000 years as the deadliest thing in every galaxy, which is the exact same prison with a different view. And now here they each were. The one being the other couldn't intimidate. The one insult the other couldn't predict. The one game the other couldn't win by default. For two creatures whose entire tragedy was that nothing could touch them. Touching wasn't the point anymore. Being met was. And they met each other. Spikes out, grins on, as equals, for the first time in either of their very long existences. They would have denied being friends. Alastor didn't have friends. He had entertainments and assets. Lobo didn't have friends. He had bar fights and bounties. Both of them would have told you, with total sincerity, that the other was merely the least tedious way to kill an afternoon. Husk, watching them cackle over a card game that had already destroyed 2 tables, said it best. Look at those 2 liars, he muttered into his drink. Ain't got a single friend between 'em, and man, they both found one. There was one moment, just one, that season, that mattered more than the cards. It was late. The parlor was empty, except for the 2 of them, and a bottle of something Alistair had produced from somewhere unspeakable. And Lobo, loosened by the drink and by the strange safety of talking to someone who genuinely could not be used as leverage against him, said something he hadn't said to anyone, not even accidentally to Velvette at 3 a.m. "Can I ask you something, radio man?" He wasn't grinning. "You've been down here, what, decades? You chose this. Coulda gone anywhere, done anything. And you set up in a rehab hotel, run by the devil's kid, needling everybody, playing cards." He turned the glass in his hand. "Don't you ever get sick of it? The forever of it? Being the scariest thing in the room every single day. And every single day it means less?" Alistair's grin flickered. Just slightly. Just for a second. A hairline crack in the mask. There and gone. "You know," he said, and the radio crackle had gone quiet. "No one has ever asked me that. In all my years down here. Not once." He looked at Lobo, and for one moment 2 of the loneliest, most powerful, most bored beings in all of creation looked at each other across a wrecked card table and understood each other completely, without either one having to say the ugly part out loud. "I find," Alistair said finally, softly, "that it helps enormously to have someone worth playing against." "Yeah," said Lobo. "Yeah, it does." Then Alistair's grin snapped back to full wattage, and he swept the cards up and declared Lobo a filthy cheat, and Lobo threw him through the last remaining table, and the moment was over, because neither of them could survive being sincere for more than about 8 seconds. But it had happened. It counted, and they both knew it. Velvette found out about the whole Alistair thing the way she found out about most things, from the feeds, and then, more privately, from watching her husband come home from the hotel in an actively good mood, which was happening more and more often, and which she was choosing, with tremendous discipline, not to think about. She should have been worried. Her asset was spending his time at a rival wildcards hotel, befriending the one overlord in hell that even she was careful around, developing a whole social life she didn't control and couldn't monetize half of. From a pure brand management standpoint, it was a disaster. But she watched Lobo come back one evening, genuinely cheerful, holding a deck of cards he'd apparently stolen from Alistair, purely to be annoying, and something in her chest did the problem 3 thing again, the flicker, the unwelcome warmth, the thing she kept deleting, and this time, just for a second, she let herself not delete it. "He's happy," she thought, and then, before she could stop it, "I'm glad." She caught herself. She frowned. She deleted it. It didn't stay deleted. Nothing ever stayed deleted with problem 3. And Velvette was beginning, slowly, with mounting dread, to suspect that the airtight, unbreakable bond she'd fastened onto the most dangerous being in hell, as a business maneuver, might have fastened onto her too, in a way no business plan had ever accounted for. She was going to have to deal with that eventually. She really, really did not want to. Neither did he. But eventually has a way of arriving whether you want it to or not. And up in the seams of 2 afterlives, the powers that had been watching the anomaly were finished watching, and had just settled on a plan. And their plan had a date on it. The date was Extermination Day. Once a year, heaven comes to hell and does murder. They call it the extermination. It is, officially, population control. Hell breeds sinners faster than it can hold them, so once a year the exorcists descend, a legion of masked angels with holy spears and blank white grins, and they spend one night culling the overflow. Anyone caught outside is fair game. Angelic steel is the one thing that kills a sinner permanently. No respawn, no second death, just gone. For the souls of Pentagram City, it is the single fixed terror of the calendar. One night a year, board up your windows, hide in the dark, pray to nothing, and hope the angels pass your street by. The overlords have arrangements. The powerful bunker down behind wards and walls. The Vees seal their tower. Everyone who can afford safety buys it, and everyone who can't dies. And every year it happens exactly the same way, and it has always happened exactly the same way, because that is the deal. Heaven's blades are absolute. Nobody has ever fought an extermination and lived. This is the context you need to understand why what happened this year broke everything. Velvette wanted him in the bunker. "It's one night," she said, and there was an edge in her voice she didn't usually let show, an edge she'd have called brand management stress, if you'd asked her. and would have been lying. You seal the district, you wait it out, you come out in the morning. Everyone does it. Even the overlords do it. Their spears are, Lobo, they're not like the muscle you threw through a wall. They kill permanently. They're the one thing down here that actually… Babe. Lobo was checking his chain, which was a thing he did when he was excited, the way other men crack their knuckles. You hear yourself? You just told me there's a whole army of flying murder angels coming to my new neighborhood tonight, and the pitch is hide in a basement. He looked at her like she'd suggested he eat a salad. That's the best news I've had since I got to this dump. That's… Sweetheart, that's a party. It's not a party, it's a… They can't kill me. They can kill everyone. That's the whole… She stopped, made herself breathe, made her voice go flat and cold and controlled, the way it went when she needed to win. You don't know that they can't. Nobody's ever tested it. Their steel isn't demon steel. It isn't the stuff you're used to. It's angelic. It's built specifically to… And there it was, the one thing she hadn't meant to say, hiding underneath all the brand management. I don't know if it can kill you, and I don't want to find out. Lobo heard it. Of course he heard it. He heard the thing under the thing, the way he'd heard it in reverse at 3 a.m. on their wedding night. And for a second, just a second, the grin softened into something almost gentle. Vel. He crouched down, which brought his enormous face roughly level with hers, an intimacy he'd never once performed on camera. I got thrown into a star, on purpose, by pros. I'm the last of my whole species, 'cause the universe tried real hard to get rid of the rest of them, and then met me and gave up. He tapped his own chest. I'm the thing that don't die, princess. That's not a brag. It's just the deal. Heaven kicked me out 'cause they couldn't hold me. So no, I ain't gonna find out their little pig stickers work on me by hiding in a basement. I'm gonna go find out the fun way. He stood back up, chain rattling. And when I walk back in tomorrow morning without a scratch, you're gonna owe me the biggest drink in hell, and I'm gonna be insufferable about it. Velvette looked at him for a long moment. She had 100 arguments left. She was very good at arguments. She used none of them, because she'd just understood, standing there, that she couldn't stop him. Nobody could stop him. That was the whole point of him, and that the reason she was fighting so hard wasn't brand management at all, and that if she pushed 1 inch further, he'd see the whole of Problem 3 written on her face, and she was not ready for that. Not tonight. Maybe not ever. Fine, she said. It came out smaller than she wanted. Go get yourself killed showing off, see if I care. That's the spirit. He was at the door when she said it, quietly, to his back, before she could stop herself, in a voice she'd deny using. Lobo, come back. He paused. He didn't turn around, but she saw his shoulders shift, saw the grin change shape. Always do, sweetheart, said the main man. Always do. And then he went out to meet the angels. The exorcists came at midnight, the way they always did, a white host pouring out of a tear in the red sky, spears gleaming, masks grinning, fanning across the city to do the one-night work of a year's worth of death. They found the streets empty, the way they always did, boarded windows, bunkered overlords. A city holding its breath in the dark, routine, absolutely routine. And then they found the enormous white sinner standing alone in the middle of the biggest square in the district, cracking his neck, holding a hook and chain, grinning up at them, and shouting, genuinely delighted, arms spread wide in welcome. There they are. Come on down, Feathers. I heard you throw the best party in the afterlife. Let's see it. The lead exorcist, Adam's finest, a veteran of a dozen cullings, did what exorcists do to sinners who don't hide. She dove, spear leveled, holy steel screaming down at the idiot who'd forgotten to run. The spear hit Lobo square in the chest, went clean through. Angelic steel, the one thing in all of hell that kills a soul permanently, buried to the haft in the main man's sternum. There was a pause. Lobo looked down at it. He looked back up at the exorcist, who was still gripping the spear, whose blank white grin had, impossibly, for the first time in the history of the extermination, begun to look uncertain. Huh, said Lobo. That the good stuff? The kill ya forever stuff? He wrapped one fist around the spear. Aw, he said, cute. And he pulled it out. The wound, the permanent, unhealable, soul-ending wound that no sinner had ever survived, closed, knit shut, vanished. Because angelic steel was built to end a sinner, and Lobo, whatever the machinery had tried to file him as, was not and had never been an ordinary sinner. He was the thing 2 afterlives had rejected precisely because their rules didn't hold him. Heaven had kicked him out because it couldn't process him, and now heaven's own blade had just discovered the same thing. Live, in the middle of Pentagram City, in front of 100 exorcists who had never once in their existence seen a spear fail. "Okay," said Lobo, rolling the spear in his hand, testing its weight, delighted. "Now we're talking." What followed was not a battle. A battle implies the possibility of 2 outcomes. What followed was the single most one-sided night in the entire history of the extermination. The main man, unnerved and ecstatic, wading into heaven's finest with their own broken spear, and a chain, and 4,000 years of pent-up boredom, having, by an enormous margin, the best night he'd had since he arrived in this hell. The exorcists came in a host and left in a hurry. Their weapons didn't work. Their numbers didn't matter. The one thing in creation that could kill anyone had met the one thing in creation that nothing could kill, and the math simply did not resolve. By the time the sky tier sealed and the survivors fled back to heaven, the district that should have been a graveyard was, for the first extermination in living memory, almost entirely intact, because the angels had spent the whole night dealing with him and hadn't gotten around to anybody else. The sinners came out of their basements at dawn to find the main man sitting in the middle of the square on a pile of broken holy spears, drinking a beer he'd gotten from somewhere, whistling. He'd saved the whole district. He'd done it entirely by accident, purely because he thought fighting angels sounded fun. But he'd done it, and the whole district knew he'd done it. That changes a city's relationship with a man. It really does. But the part that mattered, the part that would echo all the way up into the seams of creation, wasn't the district, or the sinners, or the pile of spears. It was that heaven now knew. Up in the Silver City, the survivors reported what they'd seen, and it was not believed, and then it was reviewed, and then it was believed, and then it caused something that heaven had not experienced in a very long time: alarm. Because the extermination was the load-bearing wall of the entire arrangement. Angelic steel was absolute. It was the thing that made heaven's authority over the afterlife total. It was the one weapon that no sinner, no overlord, no radio demon, not even the devil himself could survive. And a 9-foot lunatic who'd fallen out of the wrong sky had just pulled it out of his own chest and laughed. If the blade wasn't absolute, if there existed even one soul it couldn't touch, then the whole theology cracked, the whole arrangement, the whole quiet understanding, thousands of years old, about who held the ultimate power over the dead. It all rested on the blade being final. And the blade was no longer final. The blade had met the main man, the powers upstairs, and, quietly, the powers downstairs, who had their own reasons to fear a soul that neither afterlife could hold, stopped merely watching the anomaly. Watching was over. The anomaly had just publicly, humiliatingly broken the one rule the entire cosmic order was built on, in front of 100 witnesses, on the biggest stage there was. Now they had to do something about him. And the terrible, funny load-bearing problem, the same problem the machinery had run into in the very first hour, the problem that had started this whole story, was that there was still, even now, nothing they could do. You can't kill him. You can't hold him. You can't banish him. Banishing him is what caused this. He is married, by an unbreakable bond of his own dead people's making, to the woman who runs Hell's media, and he has just become the folk hero of a district and the drinking buddy of the radio demon, and he is, structurally, cosmically, stuck to reality in a way nothing has ever been stuck before. The powers of 2 afterlives convened, and for the first time in the history of either, they found themselves asking not how do we destroy this soul. They'd established, at spear point, that they couldn't, but a very different, very dangerous question. What does he want? And what happens if he ever decides he wants more than a drink and a good fight? Because a weapon nobody can control is one thing, but a weapon nobody can control, who's just discovered he likes it here, who's got a wife, and a friend, and a city that cheers his name, and a reason, for the first time in 4,000 years, to actually care what happens next. That was something new under 2 suns, and nobody, up or down, knew what to do about it. Here is what the powers understood, that Lobo and Velvette were both still working very hard not to. You cannot threaten a man who wants nothing. This was the whole reason the main man had been ungovernable for 4,000 years. You can't hold a gun to the head of someone who'd genuinely be fine if you pulled the trigger, who can't die, who owns nothing, loves nothing, needs nothing, and finds his own extinction mildly funny. Lobo had spent his entire existence being the one creature in the universe with no pressure points, and that had made him free, and that freedom had been the loneliest thing in all of creation, and he'd never once connected those two facts, because connecting them lived in the drawer he refused to open. But a man with a wife, a man with a friend, a man with a city that cheers his name, that man has handed the universe a set of handles it did not have before. The powers were not stupid. They had watched the extermination fail. They had accepted, at spear point, that the main man himself could not be touched. And so they did the oldest, cruelest, most sensible thing there is to do to a creature that has finally, after an eternity of invulnerability, made the catastrophic mistake of caring about something. They went after the something. It came dressed as a business dispute, because the best traps always wear ordinary clothes. Vox saw the opening first. Vox, who had spent weeks marinating in fear and humiliation, watching the junior partner ascend on the back of a weapon he couldn't touch. He couldn't move on Lobo. Nobody could move on Lobo. But he'd been watching, the way Vox always watched, and he'd noticed the same thing the powers had noticed, that the invulnerable man had started to flinch at exactly one thing. Not spears, not angels, people, a coat that didn't fit, a card game, a small woman saying, "Come back." And when a quiet emissary from the powers that be came to Vox, offered him a way back to the top of his own empire, offered to make the humiliation stop, asked only for a little cooperation on timing and access, Vox, who was frightened and proud, and had never once in his existence chosen the brave thing over the safe one, said yes. The plan was simple. You cannot kill the main man, but you can make him choose. You can engineer a moment where the one thing he can't do, be in two places, protect two people, save everyone, gets put to him at knife point. You can't beat a man who fears nothing, but you can finally give him something to fear, and then you can pull the trigger on it, and see what the unkillable thing does when the universe finally has his heart in its fist. They moved on Velvette, not clumsily, not with muscle. Muscle was a joke, and everyone knew it. They moved on her the way you move on a media executive, contracts, leverage, a manufactured crisis inside the empire. Vox's cooperation opening doors that should have been locked, and underneath all of it, angelic steel, the one thing that kills permanently, held quietly in reserve for the moment she was isolated, and the main man was too far away to reach her in time. Get her alone, get her cornered, and let Lobo arrive one heartbeat too late to do anything but watch. Because a main man who watched his wife die on angelic steel, who learned in that instant that his invulnerability was worthless against the only thing that had ever mattered, might finally be a main man who could be bargained with. Broken things are so much easier to file. It was a good plan. It was a genuinely good plan. It correctly identified the one and only vulnerability the most invulnerable being in creation had ever developed. It made exactly one mistake. It assumed that because the marriage had started as a con, the two people inside it were still running it. They weren't. They hadn't been for a while. They'd just been too proud, both of them, to say so. Velvette knew it was a trap. She wasn't an idiot. She'd built her whole existence on reading the room, and the room, that night, was screaming. The emergency at the empire's edge that pulled her away from her wards and her people, the doors that shouldn't have opened. Vox, too smug, too absent at exactly the wrong moment. She'd walked into it anyway, because walking into it was the only way to confirm who was behind it, and because, and she'd have died before admitting this, some cold, competent part of her had already run the numbers and concluded that whatever they were planning, they'd planned it around her, which meant she was the bait, which meant the real target was, oh no. She figured it out about 4 seconds before the trap closed, standing alone in a place she shouldn't have been, watching white masked shapes with grinning faces and gleaming steel step out of the shadows all around her, and understanding with total, sickening clarity that this had never been about hurting her at all. This was about making him watch. And in that moment, cornered, isolated, angelic spears leveled at her from every side. The one weapon in creation that would end her permanently. No respawn, no coming back. Velvette discovered something about herself that 100 years of cold transactional survival had never once revealed. Her first thought was not save me. Her first thought was don't let him see this. Don't do this to him. He just started to have things. Don't make me the thing that gets taken away. She thought about the coat she'd never gotten back. She thought about him coming home from the hotel in a good mood, holding a stolen deck of cards. She thought about 4,000 years of a man being the loneliest thing in the universe, finally having a wife and a friend and a city, and about how the whole point of this trap was to teach him that having things was a mistake, that caring was a weakness, that the universe would always take it back. And Velvette, cold, transactional, brand-obsessed Velvette, who had married the man as a business maneuver, felt her heart crack straight down the middle, not out of fear for herself, but out of pure fury that anyone would try to teach him that lesson. She'd deleted problem 3 100 times. It had never once stayed deleted. It wasn't problem 3. It never had been. It was just the truth, arriving late, the way the truth does. You picked the wrong. She started to snarl at the grinning masks. Chin up, no fear. Never any fear. And that was when the wall came in. The thing about the plan, the one fatal flaw, the crack that ran through the whole beautiful architecture of it, was timing. It required Lobo to arrive 1 heartbeat too late, to come around the corner and find it already done, to watch. But nobody had told the plan about the coat. Because Lobo had spent weeks not thinking about a drawer that kept getting fuller, and the human heart, even a Czarnian one, even one 4,000 years old and buried under an ocean of beer and bravado, is not actually a thing you can lie to indefinitely. Some animal part of him, some part that had been paying attention while the rest of him refused to, had clocked Velvette leaving that night, had clocked the wrongness of it, had clocked Vox being absent, and the emergency being too clean, and had done the one thing Lobo never did, which was worry, and had turned him around and pointed him back toward his wife, a full, precious, plan-ruining 90 seconds early. He did not arrive 1 heartbeat too late. He arrived through the wall. He arrived through several walls, actually, at approximately the speed of a falling star, because the instant he'd seen the angelic steel leveled at her, the one weapon in all of hell that could take her from him permanently, something happened inside the main man that had never happened before in 4,000 years of invulnerable, untouchable, unbothered existence. He got scared. Not for himself. He'd never been scared for himself. He couldn't be. But standing in the ruins of the wall he'd just come through, looking at a dozen spears pointed at the small, furious, fearless woman who'd covered him with a coat that didn't fit and told him to come back, Lobo felt, for the first time since the last day of Czarnia, the specific and unfamiliar terror of having something to lose. And the main man scared is a thing the universe had never had to reckon with, because the main man had never had a reason to be scared before. Scared, it turned out, was worse than bored. Scared had teeth. He went through heaven's finest like they were made of paper prayers. It wasn't a fight. It wasn't even the joyful carnage of the extermination. It was something colder and faster and much, much more frightening. A man who felt nothing his whole existence discovering, all at once, that he felt this, and turning the full and terrible weight of 4,000 years of pent-up loneliness into the single-minded work of putting himself between his wife and the one thing in creation that could end her. The spears didn't matter. The numbers didn't matter. Nothing mattered except the 6 feet of space between Velvette and the angelic steel, and Lobo filled that space with his own indestructible body, and dared them. When it was over, and it was over fast, he was standing over her, breathing hard, surrounded by the wreckage of a plan the powers had been certain would work, and he turned around, and the fury drained out of his face, and what was left underneath it was something so undefended, so unlike anything he'd ever let anyone see, that Velvette actually took a step back. "You okay?" said the main man. Quiet, wrecked, not a trace of a grin. "Vel, are ya? Did they?" He was checking her for wounds with his enormous hands, gentle in a way that should have been impossible for someone built like a demolition, and his voice was doing something it had never done, something with a crack right down the center of it. "I got scared," he admitted, and he sounded furious about it. Furious and undone in equal measure. "I ain't been scared in 4,000 years, and I turned a corner and saw them pointing that stuff at you and I got. I don't do scared, Vel and I." "I know," she said. "I know, you enormous idiot." And Velvette, who had spent this entire story deleting one single feeling over and over, who had married him as a maneuver and told herself the flicker was just numbers, who was cold and transactional and never afraid of anything, reached up and grabbed a fistful of his stupid leather jacket and yanked the most powerful being in creation down to her level, and was also furious in exactly the same wrecked, undone, terrified way, because she'd figured out her own version of the same thing 4 seconds before the wall came in, and she hated it, and she meant it, and there was no deleting it now. "It was supposed to be a con," she said, and her voice cracked too. "It was a stunt. It was for the views. You were an asset. I had a plan, and it was airtight, and she stopped, made herself say the true thing, the undeletable thing. And somewhere in there it stopped being a con, and I didn't notice. And then tonight, I was standing there about to die, and my first thought wasn't save me. It was, don't let him see. It was, don't make me the thing that gets taken away from him. And that's, Lobo, that's not a maneuver. That's not leverage. That's..." "Yeah," said Lobo, very quietly, still holding her like she might vanish. "Yeah, I know. Mine too. 2 con artists. 1 wall-shaped hole. Both of them finally, at the worst and truest possible moment, out of lies to tell each other. The marriage had been fake. Everybody knew it had been fake. It had been the biggest, most cynical publicity stunt in the history of the afterlife. A bond built out of 2 people trying to swindle each other for clout and boredom, and a good headline. The problem, the beautiful, load-bearing, cosmically notarized problem, was that the Carnivac had been real from the first drop of blood. It had bound them for real, while they both thought they were joking. And somewhere in the weeks since, without either of them signing off on it, without either of them daring to say it out loud, the rest of them had caught up to the paperwork. The feelings had gone and gotten as real as the bond. The machinery, up in the seams of creation, had filed them married on day 1. It had just taken the 2 of them until tonight to agree. The morning after you break the one rule the universe is built on, the universe still expects you to show up. That's the funny thing about cosmic order. It's enormous and ancient and absolute, right up until a 9-foot Bastille puts a hole through it, and then it just sort of has to figure out what happens on Tuesday. Tuesday, as it turned out, was a negotiation. But first, Vox. Because betrayal has a price, and in hell the price is usually collected in person. Vox had spent the night after his little arrangement collapsed, doing what Vox did best, preparing his excuses, rehearsing his deniability, arranging the facts of the failed trap into a shape where none of it was quite his fault. He was very good at this. It was, in the end, the only thing he was truly good at. The reframe, the spin, the story where Vox comes out clean. It did not help him, because the main man does not watch the feeds. Lobo came for Vox the next morning, and he did not come angry, which was worse. He came calm. He walked into the tower of black glass past security that knew better than to try, and he found Vox mid-reframe, and he did not throw him through a wall, which everyone in the building had braced for. He just looked at him, for a long, long moment, until the static under Vox's screen started to whine. "Ya bet against me," Lobo said finally, quiet, almost thoughtful. "That's fine. Everybody does once. But ya bet against me by going after her." He tilted his head. "See, I can't be bought. And I can't be scared for me. And I figure that must have been real frustrating for you. So you found the one thing I can be scared about, and you sold it to the angels for a chance to feel big again." He leaned down, until his face filled Vox's entire screen. "I'm not gonna kill you, Vox. I want you to hear that. I'm not gonna kill you, and I'm not gonna throw you through nothing, and I'm not gonna touch a single wire on your stupid TV head." Vox, against every instinct, felt something worse than fear. He felt dread. "I'm just gonna tell everyone," said Lobo, straightening up, "exactly what you did. To your own partner. To the kid you spent 100 years calling Junior. I'm gonna put it on every screen in hell. And see, I married the one person down here who knows how to make a thing go viral. He smiled, and it was not a nice smile. You live and die by your image, radio killer. So let's find out what your image is worth once the whole of hell knows you sold Velvette to heaven the second you got scared. And that was the punishment. Not death. Death was mercy. And Lobo had learned, in this hell, a crueler and more precise art. Velvette ran the story herself. It was the best work she'd ever done. By the end of the week, Vox's empire hadn't fallen. Empires don't fall that fast. But his standing had. The one currency he actually cared about. And every overlord in hell now knew that Vox, cornered, would sell his own. In a city that runs entirely on who you can trust to have your back. That's a death sentence with the dying stretched out over years. Valentino, reading the room with the survival instinct of a true coward, publicly and immediately sided with Velvette. Of course he did. The kid wasn't the kid anymore. Which brings us to the negotiation. The powers of two afterlives had run out of options, and they knew it. And there is nothing in all of creation more dangerous or more reasonable than a bureaucracy that has run out of options. They couldn't kill him. The extermination had settled that at spear point. They couldn't banish him. Banishing him was the original sin that started all this. They couldn't buy him, break him, or reach the people he loved without going through a man who now had a reason to end anyone who tried, and had just demonstrated, on heaven's finest, exactly what that looked like. So heaven and hell did the one thing they had never, in the entire history of their opposition, done together. They asked for a meeting. It happened in the Hazbin Hotel of all places, neutral ground, sort of, and Charlie was beside herself with joy at hosting it, and set out waffles that nobody ate. An envoy from the Silver City, a representative of the deeper dark. Lobo, sprawled in a chair too small for him, feet up on a table, entirely relaxed. Velvette beside him, tablet in hand, because if the powers of creation were going to negotiate with her husband, they were going to do it with representation. Alastor, lurking in the corner, grinning, uninvited, thoroughly enjoying himself. Charlie hovering, hopeful. Husk pretending not to listen, and listening to every word. The envoys laid it out, stiffly, with the deep discomfort of ancient powers forced to bargain with a thing they could not command. They could not remove him. They understood that now, but an anomaly that broke the extermination, that proved the blade was not absolute, was a threat to the entire order, and orders do not tolerate threats, and so they had come to ask, with as much dignity as they could scrape together, what would it take for the main man to simply behave? And Lobo, who had spent 4,000 years running, fighting, wrecking, and refusing, who had never once been offered a seat at the table because you don't offer the wrecking ball a chair, leaned back and thought about it, and gave an answer that surprised everyone in the room, most of all himself. I don't want your throne, he said, don't want your war, don't want to break your little afterlife, don't want to lead no army of sinners up the pearly stairs. That all sounds like a job, and I hate jobs. He gestured, lazily, at the room, at the hotel, at Charlie, at Husk, at Alastor in the corner, at Velvette beside him. I want this. I want a city that don't bore me. I want a good fight when I'm itching for one. And hey, you throw an extermination every year, so that's covered. Thanks for that. A grin at the flinching envoys. I want my wife left alone. I want the hug hotel kid left alone. I want the radio creep left alone. Though frankly, he can look after himself. Y'all leave my people be, and I'll leave your whole rickety operation be. And once a year I'll come out and wreck your angels for old time's sake. And everybody goes home happy. He spread his hands. That's the deal. Take it or send more spears. Your choice. I got all the time there is. It was not a good deal for heaven and hell. It was a humiliating deal, a deal that formalized the crack in the blade, a deal that carved out, in the middle of an afterlife built on absolute power over the dead, one single district, one wife, one hotel, one radio demon, and one unkillable idiot, that the powers of creation had to agree, in writing, to leave alone. They took it. Of course they took it. What else could they do? You cannot fight forever a thing that has forever and cannot lose. You can only, in the end, learn to live next door to it. The one soul that didn't fit had just negotiated himself a permanent address. And so a new order settled over Pentagram City, not a throne seized, not a war won, but something stranger and more durable, a truce with a hole in the middle of it, shaped exactly like the main man. Velvette ran the empire now, in all but name. Vox seethed in his diminished tower. Valentino smiled and stayed useful. The kid had become the queen, and the whole city knew whose talent she'd married, and nobody was foolish enough to move against a media overlord whose husband had beaten an entire extermination to death with its own spear. She'd started the whole thing chasing views. She'd ended it holding the most secure position in hell, married to the only reason it was secure. And the funniest part, the part she'd never say out loud, was that she'd have traded all the leverage in the underworld just to keep the idiot who came home from card games in a good mood. Charlie kept inviting Lobo to redemption exercises. He kept coming, mostly to laugh, occasionally, and he'd deny this violently, because a person who'd once been genuinely glad he existed was a thing worth keeping around. He was never going to get redeemed. He liked being the main man, but didn't kill anybody today, had quietly become a thing he tracked, in the back of his head, in the same drawer as a coat and a deck of cards, and Charlie counted every single day of it as a victory, because that was who Charlie was. And it turned out the universe had room for exactly one person that relentlessly kind, and she was living in it. Alastor and Lobo kept destroying furniture. The hotel had a permanent line item for it now. And the main man, the last Czarnian, the soul 2 afterlives rejected, the being that had run and fought and wrecked his way across 4,000 years of existence, precisely because stopping meant being alone with the quiet, and the quiet had teeth, stopped. He stayed, not because he was trapped. Nothing could trap him. That was the whole point of him. He stayed because for the first time in 4,000 years, in any universe, under any sun, there was finally something worth staying for. A wife who wasn't scared of him. A friend who couldn't be unsettled by him. A ridiculous kind kid who believed in him. A city that cheered his name. A drawer that had gotten so full it wasn't a drawer anymore. It was just a life. The thing he'd been running from and toward the whole time without ever once admitting it. The quiet still had teeth. It always would. But he wasn't alone in it anymore. And it turned out that was the only thing that had ever made the difference. He said it to Velvette once, near the end, late, on a rooftop, watching the red sky do the only thing the red sky ever did. She'd asked him, half teasing, whether he had any regrets about the con that caught them both. Whether, if he'd known the Carnivac was real, if he'd known the joke was binding, he'd have said the words anyway. Lobo was quiet for a while, which, for him, was its own kind of answer. "You know what the worst part of being unkillable is, Vel?" he said finally. "It ain't the fightin'. It ain't even the borin'. It's that everybody you ever meet, you outlast. Every single one. So after a while you stop letting anybody in, 'cause why bother? They're all just temporary. Everybody's temporary. That's the deal." He looked down at her, at the one person in creation bound to him by a contract that not even a god could break. Permanent, notarized, airtight, no takebacks. And then some tiny terrifying little schemer tricks me into a marriage that can't end. On accident, while I'm trying to trick her. The grin, the real one, the rare one, the one nobody else ever got. First permanent thing that ever happened to me. And I got it, 'cause we were both too busy lying to notice we meant it. "So no regrets," said Velvette. "Sweetheart," said the main man, pulling her in. "It's the only good decision I never made on purpose in my entire life. 2 con artists. 1 unbreakable bond. Both of them, at long last, out of anyone to swindle but the universe, which had tried to reject them both, and gotten stuck with the pair of them instead, forever, and had absolutely no idea what it had done to deserve it. Neither did they. That was the best part. The end. If a genocidal alien bounty hunter accidentally marrying a demon media mogul into a cosmically binding blood oath is the kind of unhinged crossover you're here for, do the main man a solid and hit that subscribe button, because we are just getting started, and the next collision is going to be even worse. You've been warned.